We have a ministry of the church that we call Mercy Ministries, and this ministry exists to meet the physical, emotional, and spiritual needs of those who are affected by poverty, social disadvantage, violence, trauma, and tragedy. We have done violence response teams that respond to a shooting at an apartment complex or something, where we go in, provide food, provide an arena for people to come together. Usually that's really jarring for the community. And so what we've done is we've gone in and gathered the few block radius around the shooting together, bring chaplains to help them process what's happened, and it's just a super uniting event. One of the ones that we did at Mont Chateau, both the shooter's family and the victim's family was engaged in that at some point during that day. We also, and so there's several arms of what we do in terms of this ministry, but today I want to talk to you about one thread of that, and that is, I'm going to show you a couple of things. We've done many, but I'm just going to show you three. Go to the next slide. In the area of just bettering people's lives. If you guys know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you've got to provide a person's basic needs before they can even begin to think about their spiritual needs. And so there's something about entering into people's lives and connecting with them where they live, bettering their lives, that then gives you an opportunity to even talk about their spiritual lives. And so this guy, Dino and I had met, I think we met him in the grocery store or something. His eyes were like white. With cataracts, he was barely able to see. We began to engage him in conversation, and he talked about his home being, and so his roof was leaking to such a degree that there were holes in the floors, and just living conditions that none of us would allow our children or ourselves to live in. So go to the next slide. So just a few of us went, and we tarped his roof, and then prayed for him and really met his immediate physical need and his emotional needs for connection and his spiritual needs. He already knew Jesus. He was actually a pastor in days gone by. So we felt like it was the Lord just providing for one of his servants. Next page. This lady I don't even remember where I met her. I went to her house, and when they washed, she had 2 teenagers in the house. So whenever they washed dishes, they had to let the water flow into this bucket, and then they would take the bucket out and dump it outside because they didn't have, what had happened was that it had gotten plugged up, and she didn't have the money for a plumber. She didn't know what she was doing, and so that was their solution to be able to keep washing dishes. And so when we got some guys in there, traced the problem down, that's what the plumbing looks like underneath the house. It was just chock full. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Also, that was the inside of her house. This floor over here on the bottom was just a big hole in their bedroom floor, which they walked around. So we replaced the subflooring, put a new floor in, and also patched her roof. Next slide. This lady is a very dear friend of mine, and I first saw her in 2012 or something, and she would walk the street to go down Bonan to go to work faithfully. Rain, shine, she would be walking. And she was a hard worker, but also had 2 children. Her son was recently killed in a shooting. But she had a little 2-year-old as well. And we engaged in relationship with her just through even giving groceries and that kind of stuff for a couple of years. And she never would let me come into the house. If I'd come and talk with her, we would sit outside. She's one of those people that get caught in the middle. Like she could receive government help, but then she worked a lot. And so often she would just make slightly too much and she wouldn't get her check, but her minimum wage job wasn't enough to pay her rent and her bills. So she's one of those people kind of stuck in the middle and working all the time. So obviously she just couldn't upkeep her house. And so one day she invited me in, and this was the condition of her home. They just stuffed stuff in the cracks between the wall and the floor to try to keep some of the bugs out and the heat out, because they had a little window unit. And this lady, it looks like, oh my gosh, it's so filthy. But here's the thing, she's super clean. She has a janitorial job right now. But when you get to that point of disrepair, it's just hard to clean in a way that is meaningful. Okay, next slide. And so we got a group of people together, went and there's Kevin, went and just restored her home. Next page, there's Ptsd without his wheelchair. And so we built in the middle picture, that was just 3 little rickety steps to go up. So we built her a porch and restored the bathrooms, that one bathroom, her second bathroom. Her bedroom as well had just a floor, a hole in the floor, multiple places throughout the house. And so we put a subfloor in and put new flooring and a little kitchen. Next slide. Okay, so we have another opportunity to serve another family. What we want to do is just go in and put wainscoting on the bottom half. Everything from about here down has holes in the walls. There's some minor electrical that'll need to be repaired. Next slide. Yeah, so that's what I wanted to ask you guys before I read these scriptures. Let me read these first. Proverbs 19:17 says, whoever is generous to the poor lends to the Lord, and he will repay him for his deed. 1 John 3:16 through 18. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. If anyone has material possessions and sees a brother or sister in need but has no pity on them, how can the love of God be in that person? Dear children, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. And then Deuteronomy 15:7 through 8. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need. Next slide. And so that's what I'm asking you for today. Donations of your time, your energy. And if you can't give of your time and energy, then give some of your money to pay for the repairs. I would really love the donation of the time and energy. If anybody can, it shouldn't take a lot of skill. Really anybody could come and help do this. There is a sign-up sheet on the back out there, and if you want to give toward repairing this home, when you give, just put Mercy Ministries Repair, so we'll know it's not a general Mercy Ministries. Some people give to Mercy Ministries every month. Let's put what should we put? Family in need. Just put family in need in the memo. And then once we get a group of names that can help, then we'll decide on the date and the time when we'll be going. Awesome. Thank you. Sorry, that's a half an hour of announcements, but it was all really important. So much going on. Okay, so today is going to look super different. Besides being reverse service, you probably noticed the popcorn and the candy and stuff out. I was supposed to be speaking on Acts 2 today, but Did you say something? Okay. But I really felt the Lord just stir my heart toward a little diversion. And so let me just start out with this sort of introduction. We are triune beings, body, soul, and spirit. And all of these parts, our body, soul, and spirit, are intricately tied together, and they're synergistic. They play off of each other. So if your body is sick, it can affect your soul, your emotions. It can even affect your ability to maintain faith. Have you ever been super tired and then everything just looks sad and blue? The whole world looks like it's fixing to fall apart. And then you get a little sleep, and the next morning you wake up, or you wake up after a nap, and it looks better now. Our tiredness can affect our entire outlook. It's the same as your emotional life, which is tied to mental health. So I'm going to use emotional life and mental health because they're two pieces, but they are intricately tied. If you don't pay attention to and tend the garden of your emotional life, that can have an immense effect on your body. Excessive anger and hostility can lead to high blood pressure and coronary artery disease. Resentment, bitterness, and unforgiveness and self-hatred is linked to autoimmune disorders, rheumatoid arthritis and lupus, all these inflammatory things. Anxiety can lead to IBS, heart palpitations, and panic attacks. Repressed anger is linked to chronic back pain, headaches, and fibromyalgia. So our bodies are interconnected. Our emotions affect our bodies. Our body affects our emotions. And they all affect our spiritual life. We see it demonstrated in when Elijah went and hid in the cave. And it's interesting that the Lord doesn't immediately speak to his spiritual life, but instead he gives him food and has him take multiple naps. A nap and a snack. Yep. Oh, and doesn't that cure our kids every time? You get a grumpy kid crying, give them a nap and a snack and everything changes. The whole outlook changes. And it's the same with us. So I feel like there's a piece of a reset, and this is why I sense to interject this now. And as we are resetting and stepping back into life as we've known it in some ways, I just wanted to shine a light on this area that I've just been talking about. Due to the pandemic, the last 2 years, the World Health Organization reports that across the board, there has been a 25% increase in reported people seeking professional help for anxiety and depression. And that's just people seeking professional help. I can't even imagine the number of people who just live with a level of depression and anxiety that is elevated because of what we've walked through with the pandemic, fear, all of that. The CDC reports that during June 2021, 40% of U.S. adults reported struggling with a mental health issue or with substance abuse. And in a minute, you're going to hear a few more of those statistics. On top of the pandemic, we had an absolute breakdown of societal norms. The racial tensions, the social unrest with major, there's been so much happen. Some of us forget the riots that happened in every city where there's a call to defund the police, and it looked like utter lawlessness and anarchy was just spreading across the nation. Wars and rumors of wars, economic insecurity, and the very nature of truth is being contested, with black being called white being called black, and it's hard to wrap your mind around this steep and so quick moral decline in our nation. It has felt like the fabric of our very society is being torn apart from the inside. So you have the pandemic and all the lockdowns, all that entails, and then you have all of that stuff that I just mentioned, and those things together have the propensity to cause a great deal of unresolved grief and emotional turmoil. And if we just push our responses down, if we just, and I think one of the ways that Christians deal with some of this stuff is just I'm just going to focus on the spiritual, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm just going to have faith, and all that's important. We need to do that. But at the same time, the Word of God even says that our body is a temple of the Spirit. We are to pay attention to our bodies, pay attention to the gardening of our souls. If we don't deal with our losses, if we don't allow ourselves to look at those things and process them and flush them out, then we will get further down the road and find that we're struggling with anxiety or depression, a low level of depression, or even a lack of faith, more questioning, more doubting, and we don't even realize that the cause is all the way back at, man, I needed to process this before the Lord. So today, I want you to grab some candy and some popcorn. There's some drinks back there, lots of candy, different kinds of popcorn. Grab what you want. I'm going to keep talking while you're grabbing. I want you to get comfortable. Yes. Oh my gosh, that's so good.
I mean, it's the verse, love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. Strength is the physical person and the soul. And so it's learning to love him with our whole being, which is attending to our whole being.
Yes, so good. Okay, can y'all listen while you're grabbing? You are also going to need a pen. Here's a box of pens and paper. So everyone grab one of these little booklet papers and a pen as well, please. For the saving of time, can y'all listen to me? I'm going to give an introduction. Okay, so listen up. We are going to watch psychologist Henry Cloud as he talks about how to reset our brain and care for our souls after these multiple hits that have come, just one on top of the other. If you're not familiar with him, he is a clinical psychologist who has written many books. He is the author of the iconic book Boundaries, which sold over 20 million copies worldwide. He's a pastor to pastors, a leader to leaders. Be prepared. There's going to be some clinical stuff that's absolutely fascinating. He talks about brain science while also addressing the spiritual and emotional components. If, as we're watching, something comes up in your heart, just jot it down real small on the piece of paper. Some of you might need two or three of those. I don't know. Just so you don't forget, because at the end, we're going to have a reflection time that you're going to go before the Lord and you're going to process some stuff. But I want to encourage you in the midst of it, if something comes up, write it down. I really, really want to encourage you, if you find, because the Holy Spirit's doing this, that if tears come, I'm going to turn down the lights when we're watching it so no one can see you. Let your tears flow. Tears are a gift from God to flush out the toxic emotions that can get stuck inside. So just let yourself cry if you feel like crying. If the Lord brings nothing up and you're doing awesome and you've processed everything well, this is still going to be an incredible source of information. It's going to be a training for you on how to talk to other people that are hurting, how to respond. Often we say the worst things. I can't tell you the people who have told me who have lost someone they love, but they can't come to church because they don't want to talk to the people because people say stupid things. They just, I think we're trying to help, and our silence, just, I love you, would be the best thing that we could say. Not, oh, he's in a better place now. Or, some of the things that we say that we have no idea the depth of the pain that someone's going through. And we just need to have appropriate boundaries to love them, to hug them, and weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn, not speak about it often. I've even thought about, we've talked about this to multiple people, having a section that's like a sticker, do not talk to me. I think it'd be brilliant. People would come because sometimes if people are in so much grief, you just can't even give to another person. And we feel like we're giving to them by hugging them. We were actually talking about this in prayer this morning, how some people need different things. So anyway, that's a complete aside. Sorry, rabbit trail. So we are going to watch this video right when it's done. I talked to Lee about whether I should just write my own, but he says it so perfectly. That's why I'm showing you the video instead of me writing something on my own and presenting it. And then we're going to take about 10 minutes after that in a time of reflection before the Lord. And then we will move into worship right after that. Okay? All righty. Ready?
That's kind of a long walk. Good morning. We are going to, before we get started, invitation went out to join us this morning to the first responders and first line healthcare workers that have gone through, as we're going to be talking about the effects of COVID on all of us this morning. And we're not going to ask you to stand because a number of you have asked us not to do that because you don't want to be embarrassed but draw attention to yourself. But I just want to, the rest of us, all of you that were first responders and in that group that are on the front lines and healthcare and all of that, let's just thank them. You guys have been through it in a different way than a lot of people. So thank you to that. I was the last, do y'all need a good weight gain plan? So for the last 2 years, I was in a wheelchair when I'd have to go anywhere. I couldn't walk for a little over 2 years. I've had 3 surgeries, and now I'm walking again, so that's really good. But when COVID started, we're talking about the effects of COVID and first responders, about 6 months into it, with me not being able to move and just sitting around, my wife had to call the first responders for me. She reached out to Weight Watchers. And that's kind of how my COVID experience went. So anyway, I'm headed back down now. We are going to talk about, any of y'all notice we've been through a pandemic? Did you notice that? Anybody notice any effects on you? Well, it affected everybody. It affected everybody in different ways, and depending on what you're bringing into it and also what you went through and how close to things you were and all of that, it's affected a lot of people pretty severely. I'm a psychologist, and so I keep track of this stuff. And normally, in America, we have about 17% or so of people in the country who at any moment are diagnosable, meet criteria for depression, anxiety, or an addiction. By June of 2020, over 40% of Americans met criteria. So if you were affected by this and you found yourself stressed or anxious or depressed, I'm going to go into, first of all, you're not alone. I'm not talking about extremes here. We're talking about 40% of the country. This is who sits in the cubicle next to you or who looks in the mirror, when you get up in the morning back at you. We're talking about all of us, right? It affects us. So I'm going to talk about kind of the way that works and why it did, and also talk about what you can do about it. So hopefully, we're kind of coming out of this thing. It's a little different here. I live in Beverly Hills, and I've never been to a free country like this before. And during COVID, it's a little different in Texas. We were pretty locked down, still are actually, in a lot of ways. It's interesting how different people go through it different ways. But funny thing about the lockdown stuff. In the first 6 months of COVID, I did probably 80 Zoom events. You couldn't, remember, it was really shut down. All events and, gatherings like this and speaking events and all that were canceled. And I think I did about 80 in 6 months. And then after that, for a long time, events have been canceled. And I finally, it's interesting to be here and talk to real people. Like I'm not on Zoom. Like there's humans here. And I said last night, I don't know if I can give a talk with my pants on. I don't know how to do that. So anyway, we're all adapting. We're coming out of this, and we're going to talk about it. All right, so what happens to your brain when you're in a situation where there's prolonged stress? What happens to you? That's what we're going to look at and the effects it has on us. The way God designs you, and you are an incredible, incredible machine. And the way He designs you, you have two regulatory systems in your brain. That one of them, when threats come or when something comes that's dangerous or, has some sort of significant problem to it, like a COVID or anything. It could be when you're driving, when a car pulls out in front of you. You've got a system that activates a lot of stuff to prepare you to react to that. You've all heard of the fight or flight response. Well, actually, it's fight, flight, or freeze. Depends on how much, what our options are, how you're put together, and kind of how much, cortisol and everything gets shot up. But you're either going to push against the threat and get angry, or you're going to try to get away from it, or you're going to get paralyzed. And it happens in a moment, right? And we get activated. That's the good thing, because you got to react if something happens. You got to be ready. Ah! I saw a couple of you jump, right? Now, if I could run out when you jumped and, take your pulse and look at your eyes and look at your breathing, you would have gotten amped up a little bit. The rest of you just looked at me like I was crazy. But when you got amped up, and then you realize, I'm just playing around, the other system took over from your thinking brain, and it said, it's not a threat, it's just a funny moment. And that system begins to take over, and it calms down. The other one, the activating system, shuts down, and your prefrontal cortex takes over, and now you're thinking, and you have choices. Oh, I don't have to run out. This is a joke. I think I'll laugh, or I'm not going to laugh because he's not funny, or something. And you start to evaluate it, and then you go on. That's how we're made. There's only one problem in a situation like COVID, or in other extreme stress situations that might even be for a moment, like people experiencing combat. So it can happen in a moment, or it can happen over time, where the system is overwhelmed with more than it can process. That's what happens and causes what we call PTSD. If we have anybody in here that's suffered from PTSD, a lot of people don't realize you're not crazy if you have PTSD. PTSD is, we call it a psychological problem, which it is because it manifests itself that way. We have flashbacks and get numbed out, and depression and anxiety and a bunch of stuff. Now, PTSD is basically a physical problem. Because what happens in PTSD, when somebody is in combat and they see people get blown up, or they have an accident, or they're raped, or they're beaten, or whatever it is that's traumatic, is too much to handle. What happens is, in that moment, you have extreme amounts of cortisol and adrenaline and everything that get released, and the brain can't process that much. It doesn't have a chance to process that much. And so what happens is, all of that cortisol, all those chemicals, they stain that memory physically. They stain it in a part of the brain, the hippocampus and around there, and it gets stained and it can't move. So it can't flush its way out. See, most of the time when we have experiences I'm going to talk about, we process those, and God's designed us so we process stuff and sort of moves, it gets flushed out through tears and talking and all of that. But in PTSD, it can't. It's stuck. And it's also stuck in the part of the brain that isn't connected to time, because you can't put words to it yet. And the parts of the brain that are connected to time and sequencing and language, this thing lives over here, and the wires aren't even connected. So that's why a lot of times people have anxiety like that and extreme stress, and some well-meaning Christian comes up and says, well, you should just claim this verse. Well, that goes in the side of the brain that's not even connected to where the anxiety is coming from. And they say, it doesn't help me. And then they say, well, you don't have enough faith. Well, I got all faith I got, but I know I'm still anxious, and that's not helping me. Now, there are verses that do help, which I'm going to talk about. But that's what happens in PTSD. Now, if we take a continuum from PTSD to maybe a lot of where a lot of you are, where you're not really having flashbacks, but what happened was this activating system stayed activated for too long, like months and months and months and months and months. And then what happens is it begins to take its toll, and it gets overactivated, and it kind of gets stuck overactivated. So then we've learned to do something called fear the fear. And then you have anxiety attacks. You just feel it coming, and I'm getting anxious again, and you try to talk yourself out of it. And how many of you experience that? No, you don't have to raise your hand. This is Gateway Anonymous. I shouldn't have done it. But you know the feeling. And it can be anxiety, it can be depression, it could be on edge. And what we saw in COVID was relationships began to suffer, because as we began to, our functioning changes, we kind of sometimes isolate and disconnect and can't, kind of numb and all that kind of stuff. So that's what's sort of, in a brief way, what's happened to your brain, and that's why it kind of still feels this way a little bit. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about resetting your brain. Turn to the person next to you that you came with and said, you need a brain reset. I've known you. You need a pre-COVID brain reset, right? So we're going to talk about how to do that. Now, why am I talking about kind of a reset like that? Well, if I were Dr. Evil, remember Dr. Evil from, what was the name of that movie? Somebody, what was it? Austin Powers. A lot of people in COVID, they just watch Netflix all the time, and they know the names of these movies. Remember Dr. Evil? If I were Dr. Evil and I was going to design the perfect weapon to just decimate humanity, I would design COVID. Now, I'm not even talking about the physical illness. I'm talking about psychologically. And what I'm going to kind of go through here is why COVID was the perfect weapon to do to people what it did in terms of anxiety and stress reactions and all of that. Because what it did was COVID was able to basically just, it'd be like, if you place bombs in a building, you wanted to blow up a building, you'd put them in certain parts of the architecture to bring the building down. Well, let's talk about you and your architecture and how COVID affected that. When God designed a person, there's a blueprint, and every person's kind of got the basic, when we talk about, how we function, we all are created in His image. We all sort of look alike, right? The way in the blueprint. I went into open heart surgery with a friend of mine who's a heart surgeon, and when he opened the woman up and their heart's sitting there, he turned to me and he goes, you know what I love about my work? And I said, what? He said, every day I come to the office and it's exactly the same. And that's true. And he just marveled at the human heart. Every time he opens somebody up, it looks like that. Well, we're kind of like that too. We're designed in a certain way psychologically. So here's how it works. If you're going to build a house, what's the first thing you do? First thing you do is you put down a foundation. right? You lay a foundation, a slab, something that can rest on that won't move, that holds it steady. Well, the foundation of a human is your connectedness in relationship. It's your attachments. And it starts when a baby comes out of the womb. How many of you ladies have babies? How many of your babies came out, turned around, and looked at you and said, "Gosh, Mom, I'm sorry. Was that hard on you?" That's not what they did, right? What they did was they came out and turned at you and they were like, "Hee, hee, hee, hee." Well, you know what they're doing? They're searching for that connection. And what happened was you picked them up and you brought them close. And after they start to feel connected, that connection's able to calm them down. And then you do it again. And then you do it again. And then you do it again. And you roll over in bed and say, "You do it this time." But it happens over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And the way we're designed neurologically, we begin to internalize our relationships and they become self-soothing inside. This is why when you're upset and you call a friend and you talk, it's able to calm you down. This is why it's from the womb to the tomb. It never stops. In fact, octogenarians, when they have a heart attack or stroke, if we put the ones that have a heart attack or stroke in a support group where they process it and their illness and versus the ones that have perfect medical care but don't have anybody to talk to about it, this group has way more incidence of second and third heart attack and stroke. See, it's the connection that we need. Babies that aren't connected with, if you feed them and water them, but you don't hold them and they're in an institution, you adopt them at 10 or 12, they start having behavioral problems. We take pictures of their brains and there's wiring that's missing because they weren't connected with. They have an attachment disorder is what we call it. And that happens to all of us. See, that's your basic defense against all that life throws at us is love. We're supposed to be connected to God and to others. In fact, one of my favorite examples of this, they took monkeys back when you could do this and scared them. It was before PETA, I guess. And they put them in a cage and they would shake it and loud noises and all this and scare the monkeys and get them really, really frightened. And then they draw blood from their brain to get a base level of how much cortisol's in there and stress. And then they put them, they're in this cage. And then all they did was, after they got the baseline, all they did was open up the cage, didn't change the flashing lights and symbols and all the noise. COVID didn't go away. All they did was, the stressors didn't go away. All they did was open the door of the cage and they took the monkey's buddy and put him in there and closed the door. And they wait a few minutes and they draw the blood and the stress level drops in half. Just because the monkey's buddy is in the cage. So here's my question to you. Who's your monkey? See, we have our monkeys, right? But not during COVID. A lot of people couldn't see their monkey. You're in lockdown, you're working remote, you can't see your best friend at work, your small group wasn't meeting for however long, you couldn't go visit, the family gatherings got divided, and all. Everybody, the isolation during COVID, remote work, all of that stuff, that disconnectedness, that would take its toll even if we weren't under stress, but the stress, you needed the connections to re-regulate the system, and you lost them. So it's a double whammy. So people started to experience that problem from the isolation of COVID. It's a physiological problem. So that's the first thing. Your foundation, how much you were able to be close to your community and the people that made you feel safe and secure and good and optimistic and all that. For a lot of you, how many of you experienced it? You just couldn't see the people that you normally see. So that's the first thing. Well, you build a house, you put a foundation. Next thing you do is you put up a frame, right? So what's the frame of our lives? The frame of our lives is God has constructed us. We're supposed to order our lives with rhythms of schedules and events and a rhythm of having something called structure in our lives, a dependable structure. If you've ever seen kids that are out of control, what do? The teacher comes in and says, okay, in your seats right now, we're going to have, reading time and story time and nap time and coloring time. And kids have got to have structure or they go crazy. And parents with good structure, the better structure they have, the calmer their kids are. Same thing with adults. I'll never forget. I went to my desk. It was the second or third week in March, or end of March, whenever that was, right after all the nationwide, remember that weekend where everything just shut down? Well, I went to my desk, I booted up my computer, and I pulled up my schedule, and it was blank, like white space. Our server went down, and I called my assistant. I said, what happened to my calendar? She said, everything is canceled for the rest of the year. Meetings and consultations I had and, offsites with companies and events. She goes, everything is just disappearing. So, and when I talk to people, everybody else is home and everything they were going to do is canceled. Well, the way God designed this, we depend on certain rhythms and structures that kind of make life ordered. Think about it. Days and nights, the way He designed it, days and nights you work and sleep. Days and nights roll into weeks, weeks into months, months into seasons, and there's a rhythm. And then within our days, there are rhythms as well, and people kind of know, sort of what that looks like. Well, when everybody got thrown into no structure for a lot of people, they were just lost. I work a lot mainly with CEOs, and the great ones during this time of big public companies, we would gather, and what they did was they recreated structure for their people and would have every morning, the first thing that they did for that first couple of months, every morning, a 1-hour call with their executive team. Gave them the structure of that. And within that call, first thing they did in the first 15 minutes was connect. How'd you sleep? How's the family? Are you worried? What are you worried about? And they're processing things. But then what they would do is they would structure the activities and what they were going to do with the people that reported to them. And those were the businesses that got up and, they got back in control and they felt like somebody was in charge and things were happening and people could function. But there were other people that were just kind of lost. There wasn't a lot of structure. And maybe their work didn't provide that anyway, or life didn't. And so this lack of having a frame that calms us down when we know what we're going to do. And I'm going to go to this meeting, and normally I have my management meeting on Wednesday, and then staffing on Thursday, and then I pick up the kids from school at 3, and all that was gone. And that really affects the system. Because when we know what we're doing at certain times, it calms us down. I remember we were down in Cajun land, my wife and I, to visit some friends. This was before GPS on your phone. And we were down driving through the bayous south of New Orleans, 60 miles south of New Orleans. That's wet, right? In the bayous. And so they gave us their address, the people we were visiting, friends of ours, and we didn't have GPS and all that. So I pull in this gas station, and I asked the guy, I said, so how do you get, and I gave him the name of the road, and he says, looks at his watch, says, it's after 2. He said, what you do is you drive down there about, it'll be a ways, I don't know, a few miles or whatever, down, and you'll see a German Shepherd lying in the grass. And when you see, because it's after 2 o'clock, he'll be there. He says, turn right when you see that German Shepherd. I go, that's my directions? I go, what if the German Shepherd? He said, he'll be there. It's after 2 o'clock. He's always there. We drive down. We keep driving. We're passing roads and passing turnoffs. And we get to this road, and there's a German Shepherd lying in the grass. And that German Shepherd was calm. That German Shepherd had structure to his life. Now, you don't have to be OCD and all anal about this, but when we don't have any, it affects us, and that happened to people in COVID. The next thing it did to you is this. Turn to the person you came with and tell them what you've been wanting to tell them for a long time. Look them in the eye and say, you are a control freak. Now, let me tell you why that's the truth. Because they are. God made us to be control freaks. The problem is we just get it upside down. See, God made you, He wired you. You take a little toddler and you hit the little hammers on the pegs and you hook their brain up while they're watching you hit the hammers and you get a little brain activity. But then you take that hammer and you give it to the toddler, their brain it just explodes. Why? Because now they've got control. They got control of the one thing that God designed us to have control of, and that's self-control. Now, we're out of control of ourselves, so we try to control everybody around us so we feel better. That's the problem, right? But we're supposed to have self-control. We're supposed to be able to self-regulate. And the essence of self-control is choices. Choices. Guess what happened in COVID? You lost all your choices. Things you used to have control over. But we're going to have a meeting at Starbucks. We're going to, oh no, we can't do that. Oh, we're going to have a gathering and we're going to this restaurant and a birthday. No, we can't do that. We're going to pull everybody in Gateway. No, we can't do that. But we're going to get no, we can't have that offsite. And things that you used to have control of and make choices, those were gradually diminishing. You know, we go into nursing homes and people are depressed and anxious. One of the things we do to make them feel better is give them more choices. Let them choose their menus. Let them choose the colors. Let them choose where they sit. Let them choose their schedule. And you give people choices and control, and they calm down. When they're out of control, that's when we start to get anxious. I'll never forget the scariest day of my life when my 16-year-old got her permit. And I got to sit in the right seat watching. I wiped her butt. She can't drive a car. I've known her since she was a baby. And I'm sitting over there and I'm like, because I'm not in control, right? We're designed to have control. It was funny. She kind of didn't quite stop at a stop sign. I'm, Olivia, and I'm like on her case, and she goes, Dad, I can drive. I go, Olivia, let me tell you when you can drive. You can drive when I can sit over here and not be afraid for my life. When I tell you I'm no longer afraid, that's when you're able to drive, and that's not today, not yet. So control is a big deal. And you lost a bunch of your choices, what you used to have control of that affected your life. One of the formulas for depression is something called learned helplessness. And they learned this back in the 60s. They took dogs and put them on a pad that shocked them. Same people that screwed around with the monkeys, I think. And they had a lever, and the dogs could hit the lever to stop the shock. And they learned quickly if they're shocked, they hit the lever and it stops it. But then they unhook the lever, and the dog's hitting the lever, and it doesn't stop the shock. And gradually, they stopped trying, and they just stooped down into this agitated depression. Well, they didn't have control anymore of the things that affected their lives. So you didn't have control of how COVID was affecting your life. That's called learned helplessness. It's a formula for depression and anxiety. So here's what they did. They had a little fence right there, right? They kept them on the pad that was shocking them. They removed the fence. And the dogs just laid there. All they got to do is step off the pad. But their brain had changed. It was altered. And they didn't feel like they had control of anything anymore. And the stress hormones that come with that are huge. That's why in PTSD, one of the problems with why the memory gets stuck is in PTSD, people don't have a choice and an option to do something active to stop it. They can't stop their buddy from getting killed in front of them in combat. They can't stop whatever's happening to them. They can't. See, we're made to control things that hurt us, stop the pain, and you couldn't do it. That affected you. And then after control, and you got you're controlling things in your house. You got the foundation, you got the frame. Now we have control of what we do in the house. What happens, you live in there for a while, and you start to kind of have some stuff inside you don't want inside. So we have systems in a house to take the trash out and flush out other things. So you eat food and you metabolize it, and some of it you want to keep and your body turns into new cells, but the waste you want to flush out. And we have systems and houses to do that. Well, God has designed you with systems to take the trash out. And the trash that lives inside of us is basically grief and woundedness and pain and anger and protest and all of that, all those toxic emotions that we have when we're hurt or injured or something's going on that's painful. You're designed to process those and flush them out. And we do that by talking through them and remembering them and processing them. And when we do that, they move from the limbic system, the emotional side of the brain. We put words to it and people process it. It's what you do in a grief group, and you process it, you get it out, and it gets connected to the other side of the brain, and again, which has time and sequencing, and it goes into a story, and it goes into a narrative, and that was then, and this is now. See, we remember COVID instead of experiencing COVID forever. And people get stuck in grief because they haven't processed it. And it's just like the person died today, even though however long later. Or it's just like I'm in combat today. I remember when I was a kid, I worked at a boat dealership, and the guy had come back from Vietnam that worked there, and I went and tapped him on the shoulder, and he just went into full-on action and grabbed something, and all of a sudden he was back in the jungle because time hadn't affected it, and that wasn't in the past. See, we got to process stuff. I was born at a young age. And I was little, and I was very disadvantaged because I had two older sisters who were way older than me, and they used to beat me up. And I used to pray for an older brother. I never got an older brother. I guess I should have known the math on that. You can't pray in an older brother after you're already here. But I always wanted one. I always wanted a brother. Never had one until I got one. And I won the lottery. I got a Navy SEAL. My brother-in-law, Mark. Amazing. Have y'all ever known any SEALs? These guys are crazy. And Mark would come back from deployment in Afghanistan or Iraq and say, Mark, tell me a story. And he'd say, well, we were at 40,000 feet and in scuba gear, and then we jumped through the oxygen level and hit the water and went down to the bottom of the ocean for a little while. We took a nap because we had been up for 3 days. And then we changed, and then 6 of us went over and boarded one of Saddam's ships and took it down, turned it around, took it to the UN holding station. Then we had breakfast. It was sort of like another day. Mark was an amazing American father, friend, brother, husband to his wife. It's okay. This is good. This is part of it. That's what I'm telling you. Things come back. We lost Mark. He was killed in Iraq in battle. And it was a devastating blow to the family, and obviously we went through all that, and the SEALs actually went through it with us. And But what happened was there was a lot of stuff going on that I had to kind of help with and take care of some people, and didn't really have the time to process it. But I think the big problem was, talk about all this stuff happening together and getting overwhelmed. When Mark was killed was a few weeks after both of my parents had died. So I lost my parents and I lost Mark. And it was in '08, and I worked with leadership and worked with a lot of leadership on Wall Street. And the financial crisis was happening, and we got all this family stuff going on, and I'm flying back to Mississippi with my parents' estate and trying to take care of things, and I'm just swamped in the leadership crises and in these big financial firms that I was working with, and I just never stopped. I never slowed down. I didn't flush anything. I didn't get any of that pain out. Never talked to anybody. I couldn't. I was busy. I just couldn't. About a year later, I'm on this tour, this speaking tour of arena events, and I'm in an arena in New York with thousands and thousands, a big arena in the round where they play like NBA games and stuff, and the Coliseum's full, and I'm on the stage, and I walk up there and I start talking. This is a year later, and all of a sudden the room starts spinning. I'm going, what is happening? My heart starts pounding, and I'm starting to, like, I'm going to have a heart attack. And then it occurred to me, while I'm talking, there's this psychologist over here. I'm two people now. I'm watching myself. I go, you're having a panic attack. And I went, oh crap, I'm having a panic attack while I'm still talking about whatever I'm talking about. And I'm having this conversation, and then I'm having a panic attack. Well, then a third person inside of me is going, don't leave the stage, because if you leave the stage, you're going to reinforce it. And what am I going to do? Well, I think, what am I going to do? I'll just keep talking. I'm going to have a heart attack. Maybe I'll pass out, and then at least they'll feel sorry for me. And and I can't leave the stage, and I keep talking. And then I remember what you're supposed to do in a panic attack is not try to feel better and not focus on it, but lose yourself in the experience. So I just try to stay in my speech, and then I calm down. And I keep talking, and about 5 minutes later, I go, oh God, I'm glad inside. I'm glad that's over. And as soon as I thought of it, guess what? It's right back, and the room's spinning. And so somehow I make it through it, and then I get on stage and I start thinking, well, I flew in. I got here at 2 a.m. My flight was delayed. I didn't eat. My blood sugar's down. I'm tired. It was a freak accident. Well, I'm on a tour. I can't remember what the next city was, but the next week I get on the stage, it happened again. And it got so bad, I didn't know if I could do it each time, but I'm trying to figure out a way to do it because it kept happening. But I somehow white-knuckled it, but I know I'm in trouble. I go, what is wrong with, what would I say to somebody if I were treating them? I'd say, well, tell me about your life. What's happened? If they said, I lost my brother and my parents within a few weeks, I'd go, maybe we need to talk about that. So I did what I would tell anybody, and I went and found a good shrink, and I sat there and I flushed it for a while, good while. And my PTSD went away, because that's what happens, but that's what we need to do. And so I don't know what your story is in COVID. A lot of you, especially if you were treating others, first responders and healthcare workers or even family members, you had to take care of kids and you were homeschooling or grandkids or family and you were all that. Or maybe you just didn't have anybody to process it with. God has designed you with a system to flush that out. And it's called grief and talking. And when you put a story to it, it gets put in a narrative. And it's just, then COVID is just one frame in the Netflix movie when you hit pause. But there's a whole story. And then it gets flushed into the past. And it becomes an appropriate memory. But you're not reliving it all the time because you reset the system by talking about it. So what have we said? I want you to look at your patterns of connectedness. What I did was I called a friend of mine and said, hey, can we get together every Monday night? I got Monday nights usually pretty open. And we started meeting every Monday night. We'd have dinner and just talk about life and process stuff. For you, I don't know what it's going to be, but maybe reconnecting. Maybe there's some people you're hanging around that aren't helpful and they need to go away for a while. Send them on a mission trip to China or something. But you need to get with people that help you. And then look at the rhythms. Get some patterns back in your life. Have a regularity to something. Get a little scheduling. Have some predictability that disappeared. And maybe some predictability about things that are helpful to join a group or, a Bible study or a support group here at the church or a weekly bridge club or, your schedule in the day. I started literally making a schedule on a pad of paper during this time. It's what I was telling other people to do. This is what I'm going to do during the day. It helps your brain. And then make 2 columns. These are things I can't control. I can't control the interest rates. I can't control when COVID is going to let me, I don't know what Fauci's going to say tomorrow, but I can't control that, right? And I can't control the supply chain problems that are going on. And write all that stuff down that you can't control and then toss it up to God and say, these are your problems. There's another column over here. Here are the things I can control that affect my well-being. And you write those down and you focus on the ones you can control and you surrender the ones you can't. If you do that systematically, that will help reboot your brain. And then we've got to flush it out, right? So you've got to figure out how this affected you, where it scared you, where it scares you now. All of that kind of stuff. And get with somebody that looks you in the eye and hears it. There's a reason, talking about the flushing system God gave you, there's a reason God put your tear ducts in your eyes. He could have put them anywhere. Could have stuck them under your arm. You could spray a little anti-tear stuff. Nobody know you're sad. No, he put them here because somebody's supposed to be looking into your soul and seeing your pain when you cry. And we hook people's brains up to a brain scan, and when they're talking about something painful, and as soon as somebody looks them in the eye that cares, you see the brain centers light up and start to flush that out and heal it. Empathy and care, the Bible says, to comfort the brokenhearted, to heal the brokenhearted, to weep with those who weep. Remember I said you can't just give somebody a verse, be anxious for nothing when their other side of their brain is anxious. But what you can do is you apply those verses where we sit with each other and we care and we have compassion, we tell our story. And those are the verses that apply to something like this. Okay? So I want you to reboot your brain. So you didn't get scared. You're healed. And thank y'all for listening this morning.
Go ahead and leave the lights down. Oh, you got the stage lights? Everything else off. And where's Amanda? Okay. So if you want to move around, move to a chair that's not beside somebody. If you're sitting too close to someone, feel free to move around. And I just want to take 10 minutes, and Amanda's going to play and just sing what she hears the Lord saying. I'd like